Do you feel the urge to move toward a more play-based practice and just don't know how to do it? Or maybe you're struggling to incorporate more child-led learning into your otherwise teacher-led program. The research is clear. Play is how children learn best during the early childhood years. But creating a classroom where play is the focus isn't always as straightforward as it may seem. I'm your host, Jen Zollinger. Join me as we explore the incredible ways that play serves preschool children and how to best implement it in your classroom. This is Play Before Pencils. Katie Heiser has an AA in early childhood education, specializing in children with exceptionalities, and a BA focusing on trauma studies. She is passionate about nature-based and play-based education and believes in developmentally appropriate practices. Over the years, she has worked with kids from infancy to 8 years old, gaining experience as a preschool teacher, program supervisor, and now as a nanny. She loves consulting and educating other early childhood educators, helping them stay updated with the latest best practices and research. When she's not working, you'll find her spending quality time with her wife, hiking, kayaking, or just enjoying the great outdoors. Katie, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. I feel like you kind of went missing. If you follow Katie on social media, she kind of went dark for a while. And over the last year, I would occasionally hop on and just type in your account to see, is the algorithm just not shooting me stuff? Is she still around? And it was just quiet for a while. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But I kind of have this little share your ECE journey series that for me, I just love hearing how people got into the field, what drives them to stay in the field. We kind of are all on this journey of figuring out what that career path looks like for us. And when you jumped back onto social media recently, I was like, I need to talk to Katie because I think that your experience is something that happens probably more often than we realize, and we don't talk about it that much. And so I really just want to kind of dive into that a little bit, and we'll get to that maybe further in the podcast. But I want to start just by having you maybe share what was your initial spark of interest in early childhood education?
Honestly, I kind of stumbled upon it. I was very young. I was figuring out what I wanted to do, as many others also experience. I was connected with a family that I had babysat with in high school, and they had a connection from their preschool that their kids went to when they were younger. And they were interviewing for a chef. And at that time in my life, I thought I wanted to be a chef and be a cook. And so I interviewed for that job. And then life kind of happened. A few months went by. But then I ended up reaching back out, and the director of the preschool, who then became my mentor, said, we do not have the cook position available anymore, but we do have a preschool teacher assistant. And I was like, I need a job. I'm young. Let's do it. I had no experience other than babysitting. I have always been a babysitter ever since I was really young. But no prior experience or education or knowledge of this whole career field. I took the job and I had to have like 12 credits of ECE credits, and got enrolled in a college and started taking classes. And from like the first day that I was there, I was like, this is what I am meant to do. I just felt a deep in my gut of, this is where I'm at. I'm so happy being here. I am, good at being around other children. It just came very natural to me, and it just made me so happy to go there every day, which was just very new and exciting. And I stayed there for about 2 years before I moved. And the director there that hired me became a huge mentor in my life and in just the career field in general. And we are still connected.
That's cool. I love how it started out as, I'm going to be a cook, and all of a sudden you're still cooking up things. It's just in a very different way. And I think a lot of us probably do kind of stumble into early childhood. We maybe start as babysitters and get a taste of it, but that's completely different really than being in, really immersed in ECE, but that you found that you loved it. And what a cool thing to find that out so young
Yeah.
and be able to just run with it at that point. So after you left that position after a couple of years, where did you go after that?
I went to Washington. So I've always loved Washington State. And I also just had a gut feeling that I needed to move here and I was still, very young, was like, this is where I'm going. I'm moving. And the first preschool that I worked at that I first kind of got into ECE was a play-based school. So already I was introduced to the field in a very exciting way because I think that hearing other people's experience of kind of stumbling into that play-based education versus more of a traditional background, I feel very lucky that the first preschool that I ever worked at was a play-based. And so I felt like I kind of had a lot of tools in my tool belt. And so when I moved to Washington, I was able to put in those like keywords on Google of play-based,
Yeah.
nature-based. I was still in college. And so my mind was just being awoken by all of my great educators of all the different niches in early childhood. And so plugged that into Google and found a very amazing, it was a home-based childcare licensed center in Bellevue, Washington. And it was small and just so outdoorsy in the redwoods. It was just like very magical. And I was there for a few years. And yeah, so I went there next and it was awesome. I continued my education in Washington and you got my degree before we then moved again. But yeah, that's where I went after.
Okay. So I think that's another like fortuitous thing on your path that you, right from the start, had experience with play and seeing how well that works with young children. I think a lot of us start out more traditional. And I know that for myself, when I finally kind of started shifting toward play, and maybe I'm curious, you say that you just kind of got on to Google and used those keywords. Were you in an area where play was like abundant, where you had like lots of options to choose from as far as seeking out employment? I know that when I shifted away from that more traditional model, I had a real struggle finding somewhere else that I could even go that embraced play the way I wanted.
Yeah, I would say yes. The first preschool I was in California. I grew up in California, and it was in a city and lots of resources. And so I did have a lot of preschools there, and or like conventions that we would go to, or professional development. And so there were resources that we had access to. And then in Washington, I was in also a bigger area, a bigger city that did have other play-based schools around or nature-based education. And even now, if you do a Google search in Seattle, there's tons of forest schools. And so there really is just like a plethora of resources, which I'm so fortunate to have. I met my wife in Washington and she was in the military, and we ended up having to be stationed in Texas. And there was like no play-based education. And so I did get hit with reality of like, well, sure, there was some play-based, but so I did get hit with reality of like, oh my God, there's not a me in every single area. And it was hard to find a school that really aligned with what I believed in, and what I wanted to see in a classroom. And I feel like at that time in my life, I was such a stickler with like what I was not going to be okay with. And it really narrowed down my pool because, I was like, no, I need the school to do everything this way. And it narrowed the pool. But it was a shocking experience of Googling and really only having two options in the area. And I drove an hour and a half each day to get
Oh,
there.
wow.
And even those schools really, they were good for me to have there, but I think just needs to, everybody needs to have some improvement is all I could
Yeah.
say. So it was good for me in that moment, but I definitely think there could be a more done if they are advocating for if they say they're advocating for certain things, if that makes
Right.
sense.
No, I can kind of relate to that as I was looking for a place to go after the last place that I worked, and I had a very narrow pool. It's interesting how regionally things can be so different. Here, forest schools are just kind of starting to take off, and in other places that they've been around forever. And so you just kind of have those regional pockets of the way things have been done is the way they've been done. And so we just continue to do that. And I think I can totally relate to that like kind of stickler personality trait where it's like, well, I know that this is best and I don't really want to compromise. And so if I go to this place that's maybe only halfway there, am I going to
Mhm.
be happy or am I going to be like the squeaky wheel that's constantly trying to change things? And do I want to
Yeah.
be that person? And so just trying to evaluate where do I fit in to that model, in my case, I ended up just starting my own program. I was really fortunate to be in a position to do that, but um, it can be really tricky to try and
It
mesh
can.
your own values and the things that you know and have learned with somebody else's and make that a happy place for everybody. So that's actually pretty impressive, that you were willing to drive far enough to find as close as you could where you were and um, to be able to at least have access to that. So okay, you were in Washington, you moved to Texas. Are you back in Washington now?
I am, yes, thankfully. Yeah.
Okay.
My wife got out of the military, and so we came back to Washington. So,
Okay. Your
yeah.
happy place back in
Yes.
Washington. So when you got back, did you jump right back into the field there? We're going to kind of talk about burnout because you've had a recent experience with some burnout. When did that kind of start to take place?
It really started to hit when we moved to Texas. I think that I had a lot of transitions in my life. One, I grew up in the West Coast, and transitioning into Texas, the South, was difficult for me. It did make my skin thicker, but it really was the start of a burnout for me, and really made me just have to like sit with being uncomfortable and all of those thoughts that came with that. So the burnout really started in Texas. I think not having the resources just readily available to me or having people in my corner that truly believed in what I believed in was really tough. I think that I was was in schools that didn't have the resources, but also didn't seem like they, and this isn't to like bash on those schools, but to my own experience, it felt like they didn't value teachers' experience in the way of giving them just like mental health breaks or just like validating
Mm,
their feelings. It
yeah,
was really just kind of like a system of go, 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 go all the time with lots of kids in your classroom, not a lot of resources, just complete burnout. And um, so it started there. And then when we made the transition to Washington, I went back to that school that I was originally at in Washington, but they have grown a lot. They had 3 schools, but I became program supervisor there. So I got into a new role, which I thought, okay, if I climb the ladder, it's going to be easier. I won't have to be in the classroom as much, but it doesn't happen.
right.
um, and so I was honestly really excited that I was able to have that position because that to me in that moment of my life was like, wow, like I really made it. I worked so hard from coming from a preschool assistant to like, a program supervisor. And I felt like, okay, I just made it. I was super, super excited. But once I got there, I think the burnout just kept coming. The burnout from Texas just continued. And you love them dearly, love that school dearly, but I think that ECE in general, just, I think a lot of people that I've talked to experience, no matter where they go, there is systematic issues no matter what. And I think
Yeah.
that I thought coming back to Washington that it was just going to be fine. I was just going to forget everything I just experienced for 2 years and I was just going to be, feeling good and no more burnout. And that wasn't my experience. Climbing up the ladder comes with more responsibility and managing other people and just lots of families you have to be in contact with every day, but also you're in this admin role and also a teacher, and it's just wearing a lot of hats. And I think with that plus my burnout already, it was just like slowly just like
Sucking the life out of you.
draining, yeah, draining my soul. And there was just like one day where my wife was like, we just have to talk about this. Like, you are just not you. And, you're like a vegetable at the end of the day. And you really just come alive during your 2 week breaks where I kind of get you
Mm,
back for a moment. But then,
yeah.
like, the Sunday scaries happen again. And then you're kind of just like this robot of just like coming home from work and being so overstimulated, or like, I can't make any other decisions. So, like, I don't want to cook. I don't want to talk. I don't want to like do anything. I just couldn't do it. And I really just had to sit with that, again, uncomfortable feeling of just like, is this what I want to do anymore? Like, do I truly love this? Can I do this forever? Like, am still young. I've been in the field for 7 years. So it's like, can I actually do this forever? Like, those questions really started to come up. And it took me a while though to really be like, okay, now I need to do it. It was just lots of discussions, lots of talking about how I feel and like, what am I going to do next? And um finally I was like, I need to make a change. I'm not happy. I don't know what it's going to look like for my future. um and it was just kind of like breaking up like a toxic
Yeah.
relationship, honestly. Like, telling other people my experience is just what I say. It's just breaking up with just a toxic relationship, because you put in all your energy and it just like kind of just drains you in a sense. And it's like, I need to either change my direction. And how do I do that while also still being in the field? Because I still loved it. I am still super obsessed with it, but how do I stay in it, but also not be so hands-on, or, a supervisor, or whatever that looks like. So, then I am now a nanny and am with a family part-time. So that is very new. I've been with them for 3 months, love them dearly. So it's all very sudden, it's all very new. So, every day is a new day of, feelings.
So when you were kind of hit with that, like I've hit the wall, this is sucking the life out of me. I'm not happy here. And you're doing all of that processing because obviously you hit a point where it wasn't just like, I'm not really sure if early childhood is for me. Like it was having an effect on your work life. It was having an effect on your personal life. It was probably even having physical symptoms. You talk
Mhm.
about, on Sundays, probably that anxiety that starts to build. As you're going through all of those things, are you continuing to work in that director role that you were in through all of
Yes.
that? And like, how long did that last while you were trying to kind of think things through and figure out what the next step is?
It was about 10 months. So it was about
Wow.
10 months of kind of just powering through. And yeah, it was kind of like debilitating, and
Yeah.
you make a good point of just like the physical body. I was really affected since Texas. I just had all of these just, health issues. And it really, I just like had to sit with myself. I was like, where is this coming from? Like, I was just once this like healthy and just, like living life. And then it kind of just like health issues came, and obviously like your mental health isn't the best. And so yeah, it was about 10 months of kind of just like, why am I doing this? I'm going to all these doctors, I can't figure it out. And honestly, once I took a break and entered into a new a change of still being in childcare, but not in, like big childcare of, being in that director role, I really just started to feel better. Like it was night and day. And I'm still experiencing that night and day now because it's so new.
Yeah. So you're continuing to work. You've got like 10 months of just it sounds like you maybe even initially the burnout was there, but you maybe didn't make the connect the dots that this is what's causing some of these things that I'm experiencing. Once you kind of made that realization, and it was like, I think that this job or, the field, whether it was the job itself or the field as a whole, are starting to affect me. What, you talk about sitting in that fear.
Mhm.
What did that look like for you? And how did you make the decision to finally cut the ties with being in the position that you were in?
I cried a lot and I'm not like a huge crier. And so it was very difficult for me to just experience so many emotions at one time. I felt super fearful because I have an early childhood education degree, which I am so proud of. But I think going through this transition and thinking, oh my gosh, what if I'm not in this field anymore? What am I going to do with this degree? And I think having a partner who got out of the military and into the corporate life, just seeing her experience,
Yeah.
her resume and trying to find a job and how much like requirements are there and what the degree you have. You have to have a master. I was like, my degree, like, to the outside world is just like chum money.
Yeah.
It's like
Right.
nobody looks at my degree and is like, I'm going to hire her at this really well-paying job that's also this and also that. And it was just daunting. Like I was so scared because I was sitting in a feeling of, oh my gosh, do I even want to do this anymore? But if I don't do this anymore, what am I going to do? And then
Yeah.
doing that Google search, it was like, I can't do anything. Like
It's a
I could,
whole nother
yeah,
overwhelm.
yeah. It's like I either am going to spend a whole lot more money going to school again, to maybe be in the same position. And so I sat in the fear. I did a lot of Googling. I was just like, okay, if I'm not going to be doing this, and what can I be doing? I kind of just tried as best as I could to line up some sort of ducks to be like, okay, this could be maybe my option if I don't do this. So that was kind of my path for a while. And then I just like felt my emotions. I just like talked it out, talked my wife's ear off. It was just like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm so scared. I can't I even do this? What am I even going to do? Like, it just really was a spiraling effect until one day I was like, I cannot feel this anymore. I need to change something. I stumbled upon career nannies on my Indeed search, and I was like, okay, they make a good amount of income. It's, there's part-time, positions available, which I'm fortunate to be able to do for this time being. And I was like, okay, this maybe feels good for me. Like I can still be in the field, I can still work with families, I can still work with children, but it's not at the level of having 90 families in your care, of managing
Yeah.
employees, of, doing 7:30 to 5, like every day. So then I was like, okay, this feels a little good to me. My nervous system chilled out a little bit. I was like, it doesn't need to be like, this is my end all be all. I can still try to figure out what my life path looks like and where my passion lies, while I'm also doing something that I do, I do love, and so that was really good for me.
I love that. I was thinking about this morning. We kind of equate early childhood or working in a classroom or, a childcare center or, within a school. There's so many like, we kind of think of the educational based part of that, part of our career. But as I was thinking this morning, in just preparation for this, what would I do if I hit that point of burnout? Where would I want to go? What would I want to do? And as my mind kind of started going, there really is a pretty broad number of applicable jobs that we can do within early childhood to be able to stay in a field that we love without, but not necessarily have to be in a classroom setting. And so you've found nannying and you've mentioned that it's pretty new, but do you want to maybe talk to us about what what skills you learned in the classroom that you're now able to bring to this new job and how you're using that early childhood education background in more of a home setting, in a place where you're still nurturing children. You're still, there still is some of that education component, but it looks very, very different than if you were in a
Mhm.
classroom setting. What has
Yeah.
that experience been like?
Yeah, it does look very different, but honestly, I would say like my day to day kind of feels very similar in the sense of like I'm caring for these children. I'm using my education piece to be able to navigate conversations with families, and so I think there's pieces of the field of being in a classroom that is in nannying work. And I think getting into the nannying world, it was kind of daunting because I was like, well, I have all this experience, I have all this education. And honestly, I think that in this field, sometimes there is a narrative of like who's on top and who's on bottom of this like top down, like if you're a director, you're like, did it. If you're like just this preschool teacher, you're on the bottom. And then on the bottom was also in the conversations that I've had or the experiences that I've seen online or whatever, nannies were also on the bottom, unfortunately. And I feel like
Yeah.
I had this bias in my mind of like, you know, if I go into this nanny world, like what is that gonna like? How am I gonna look? How is all like this ego-based feelings of, well, you know, I was once this and now I'm doing nanny work. And I feel like that's so sad. And now I'm like, I'm going to be an advocate for nannies. It's like, you know, because honestly, there's so much correlation between like what you do in the classroom, what we do with, you know, 2 kids, 3 kids at home. It really is just on a smaller scale, you know, like
Yeah.
taking in just, you know, the social emotional piece, you know, they're still children. They're still going to have feelings that you need to be able to co-regulate with them and help like explain what is going on, you know, like that happens every day at a preschool. On a bigger scale, it still happens at home. So you still be able to like be that caregiver while also doing that education piece. And what I found from being a supervisor is that I truly loved the consulting piece. Like I loved educating others. I loved talking to families. Like that is something that I was like, okay, if I take out anything from that experiences, I really love doing that. And I feel like I can still do it now. You know, the family that I work for, you know, talk to the parent every single day. You know, when there's a problem that happens, I feel like I can still use my degree to be like, this is what is happening. You know, this is my professional opinion. Like maybe we can try this and like let's be a team. Like that's what I really enjoyed, and I can still do it now. And so honestly, it looks very similar, just in somebody else's house. And once you kind of get past that, like tiptoeing around of being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
you know, it's house, and it just feels so good. Now it's like I'm stomping around and doing this, and we're all in each other's space, and it feels really good, and it feels really good to do it on a smaller scale because that's what I needed. I really needed to have this interpersonal relationship with one family with a smaller amount of kids. And it really feels like I'm like, you know, really not that I wasn't doing anything and, you know, being in a bigger childcare facility, but like when it's on a smaller scale, you can really have those moments and sit in those moments that are just so wonderful, and having such great experiences with those kids. You can really experience it for 10, 15 minutes versus when I was a teacher or a supervisor is like, I'm experiencing it for 2 minutes because something else is going on. I'm gonna have to
Move
put out a
on.
going over here. And so
Yeah.
it's like I couldn't really experience those really beautiful moments. And I feel like now I've had so many beautiful moments for a longer period of time that I can sit in.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up because as you were talking, I was thinking, I imagine that I would feel just like the impact that I can have is maybe intensified when you're in that smaller scale situation. You know,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, when you're on a large scale, you are making impacts everywhere, but it's little impacts all over the place, you know, versus a big impact in one place. And so that's got to be really fulfilling to experience that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, the family that you're working with, you're in their space. And so sometimes I feel like when we're talking about a childcare center or a preschool, parents are kind of looking, you know, they're coming to us and seeing what we're about and saying, yes, I'm interested and I'm going to enroll my child, or no, that doesn't really align with what I'm looking for. I'm going to go somewhere else. And they kind of make that decision most of the time without us even knowing it, right? They're
Mhm.
kind of getting that information beforehand. And I don't really know that much about the nannying field. So do you kind of do the same thing? Like you put out, this is who I am and this is what I'm about, and this is kind of how I plan to nanny? Or is it more like, this is who we're looking for and we want you to do this? Like, how does that kind of work, that dynamic between what the family expectation is in their home and what you're bringing to the table? And how do you marry those two things?
Yeah, so I also didn't know too much about the career nanny field. And I went through a consultant, and she was really helpful to be able to understand like the contract and taxes, like that kind of like admin position work. But she also puts in a portfolio of who I am and then a portfolio for the families. And so it really just looks like we're kind of like weird term, but like dating each other. Like I
Uh-huh.
want to be able to like feel good with the family, and they also need to feel good with me. And so I went through a few interviews with different families that obviously didn't end up, but once I got to this family, it really did work. Like it we aligned on discipline policies, or how I am as an educator but also as a caregiver. What does my with nannying, it comes with household duties,
Right.
which isn't obviously preschool teachers and childcare educators, they do a lot of that kind of like household stuff. But when you're in someone's house, it's a lot more of that household stuff. So it's really
Yeah.
getting to like, how are you, cleaning? Like, are you a type A? Are you type B? Like, how does this look? And are you good with organization? And are you okay with doing laundry? So like those little things. And it's really, the initial process was getting those portfolios, seeing if this is going to be a good fit, which that consultant did for us. And then when it did align on both sides, we met, kind of did an interview with each other. She like, interviewed me, I interviewed her. It
Yeah.
was, like it's similar. And then you do a trial day. And then after that is like, okay, are we doing this? And then it's kind of all that contract piece. So what I did enjoy with the career nanny world is that it still is very much so like when you're hiring a new teacher for a school. It's like you're doing that interview process, things are aligned, there was steps in place, which I did enjoy, because I know that the nanny world is so large and there's so many different platforms that you can go through, that either are like legal or not legal. And so there's just like a lot of different avenues that you can go through. But I am happy with the avenue that I went.
I imagine, like I think about with my students, I have 16 students in over two classes, and I make contact with the parents every single day, but usually there's not an issue. It's kind of like, we had a great day, ask your child about this, whatever. Um, it's usually only if there's an issue that a parent comes to you, which is the hard, that's where the burnout starts to come when you are
Yeah.
managing a very large center and there's always going to be something. When you're working more one-on-one with a parent on a much more in-depth regular basis, do you like what does that look like, the problem solving when maybe you are not on the same page about something? Maybe from your professional, opinion, it should be one way. From the parent's opinion, have you run into things like that? I know this is still pretty new position for you, but have you run into anything like that yet? And if not, like, what are your kind of thought processes of, I would even say not if it comes up, but when, because we're all
Yeah.
so individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I'm so fortunate that the family I do work for, we are so aligned. And so as far as now, it's really just been like open and honest communication, and I felt very comfortable sharing things that either happen during the day, those little things, or if there are bigger things to talk about. And I really do credit my experience being a supervisor and having to have so many conversations with just a mass amount of parents, and
Yeah,
hard conversations, like the
yeah,
most difficult conversations I've ever had, just like face to face with a parent about their child. Like it just, it gave me a lot of skills to be able to problem solve in a way that doesn't feel like I'm attacking someone or putting blame, or I learned how to have a hard conversation effectively, which I think when it does happen in my, job now, I do feel like I would be confident enough to be like, let's chat, like kind of use those skills of what I would do
yeah,
just a center, but just in somebody else's house, um, just those similar kind of sandwiching moments of, the positive and just the chunk of this, and like, and
right.
here are some like conflict resolution things that we can do. Here are some goals that I, like those things that you would do in a center, but just in somebody's house. So
Right.
uh yeah, I feel confident that I would be able to have that conversation. It hasn't happened, but honestly, like we just fit very, very well. Our styles are very similar. And so it feels it feels very good, which I'm fortunate of because I know that that's not everybody's experience. You know, we are very individualized, and what I think is it's going to be different from what somebody else thinks. It's just having to be that ability to have that conversation with someone, and also like when that interview happened, like just really sharing what your personal philosophy is. And I think that portfolio really helped because in that initial application with the consultant, like there was tons of questions that say like, what do you do when this happens? What do you do if this happens? And that family reads all of your questions to see like what your type of philosophy is and how you handled certain situations. And I think that was really helpful to do that so the family can see like how I handle things.
Yeah. I know, I think of myself as a parent, even with my early childhood background, it would have been fantastic to have somebody else because my interactions with my children are different than my interactions with my students.
Totally.
And and so with that difference of relationship, sometimes I did things that I look back and I'm like, why did you do that? That was, you knew better than to do that. Um, to have had somebody in my home that had a background, I imagine as a parent, that's probably super helpful, not just the help with the care of your children, but they're getting some education from you too, as they're kind of learning, parenting along the way. And I could have used a nanny just to help me with those things and just to bring
Yeah.
me back and remind me, don't
Yeah.
forget the things you learned
Yeah.
in school. So,
Yeah. And that you saying that really sparks that a feeling of that initial burnout and just being a stickler. I really learned even with being a nanny very like newly, but having to have been a stickler about like not having any room for different thoughts or opinions about what I thought about early childhood to then having that burnout and having this realization of like, I can't have everything to be perfect. And I am not always going to do the right thing. And you know, I had that experience of feeling like in this field a little bit, it feels like, especially on social media, that if you aren't this perfect image of all these other ECE educators and you aren't saying or doing the right things and you aren't this perfect play advocate or aren't this perfect whatever, falls, hashtag on Instagram that you are kind of this failure at early childhood education. And so having gone through those experiences and then now in somebody's home, I'm really trying to be aware of just that I don't need to be perfect. I don't want to be perfect anymore. I don't have to be a stickler about things. And so I think it's helpful now being in somebody else's house, seeing the way that parents parent behind closed doors is honestly very beautiful because I think that in social media or at preschool centers or whatever childcare facility, you kind of have to be this like perfect model all the time, and it's stressful, and it's what accumulated my burnout. And so now being in somebody else's home, obviously I'm trying to do everything that I believe in and all the best things, but now I feel like, okay, like other people are like, normal. Like parenting is not just this like
it's a
seeing
little
a
messy.
parent. Yeah. Like, of course I see like my sister parent her two kids, but just being in someone's house all the time, it's like, okay, like this is really beautiful. Like, we don't have to be perfect all the time. And so that's also something I'm really learning.
Yeah, I've experienced that a little bit being on social media, especially because I feel like I'm really relatively new to the whole play movement. I kind of came to that later in my career, and so I second guess everything I post. Like, is somebody going to pick this apart and say that's not enough this or it's too much of that? And it can really start to mess with your head a little bit, and
Yeah.
you start to second guess yourself quite a bit. So I have kind of just maybe two final things that I want to touch on. And the first one is more of a statement than anything, than a question. Um, at this point, you have chosen to remain in the field in a different kind of position within the field. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the contribution that you gave before your burnout was enough. And if that burnout led you down a different path into a completely different career, it's totally okay. I just want to speak to people who maybe are feeling that burnout a little bit, and feeling like maybe they've wasted time
Mm-hmm.
in a field that they don't see themselves staying in forever,
Mm-hmm.
to to celebrate the time that you were able to give. And if you go in a different direction, the skills, like you say, the skills that you've learned are serving you in a different way. And the skills will serve you in a completely different type of job if that's the direction that somebody wants to go. But what kind of advice do you have for somebody who might be starting to feel that, either starting to feel that burnout bubble up or like on the brink of, I just have to do something different? What advice do you have from the experience that you had? Is there anything that really would have helped you either process that better or come to a decision point quicker, or and not to say that you needed to come to a decision point quicker, but maybe just advice from your own experience that might help somebody else that may be feeling some of the same things that you did.
Yeah. First, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you acknowledging that what I did was enough. So thank you. I would say that my advice is really bringing in your community and the people in your corner, however that looks like, whether that is people you have never met on social media, but you have like a social media relationship with, or is it your family or your partner or the friends in your life? Really leaning on the people in your life. I feel like what I did that I wish I did differently was let people in sooner. I feel like, especially with my career, I was so hard on myself of trying to be this perfect person or continue because of the thoughts and judgments of other people, or just feeling like I just needed to keep going and kind of having this hard shell of everything's fine. And I wish I let people in sooner, because once I did, at that like end of my final, I need to be changed, I had people in my life who told me the same things that you just said, that it's okay, that you can, what you did was great, great in that moment. And you can do something, you like all those thoughts and opinions from other people. Not that you have to take all their thoughts and opinions, but just having people in your corner to rely on would have been really helpful for me. And honestly, like having other people in the field talk about this burnout would have been so much more helpful. I talked to, my coworkers, of course, felt the burnout, but it's because we're experiencing kind of the similar things, and so it didn't feel like a larger scale versus going on social media and having this conversation come up and you're listening to it and you're that person's like, oh my gosh, I'm also feeling this burnout. I think having other advocates in this field saying that it's okay, like if you have burnout, like you are not a bad educator because you like either feel like you don't want to do this anymore or you want to take a different route, as I did, or I think seeing it on a larger scale would have been helpful, which then, it fuels and empowers me to be having these conversations a lot more, to like be putting it on my platform, to be like, platform, but, putting it out there for anybody to see. It's just like, you are normal for feeling this. So I think that would have been helpful. But really, I think if you are experiencing this, talk to the people that you're closest with. Just talk it through. Just say it to everybody. Like put it out in the universe. Do your research of just kind of like, okay, if I wasn't doing this, it was really helpful to see like what I could be doing. Where'd my skills go? Once I kind of got there and, stopped sitting in like this spiral, and I was like, just open my laptop to like Google, and coming up with just different avenues of where you can go was really helpful. Seeing where you can go was helpful. I think your statement about that there's so many other different jobs you can be doing in early childhood is very valid. And I think researching those, if you don't want to be hands-on, maybe it looks like something else. Maybe if you're in a traditional classroom and feeling very burnt out, maybe you go to forest. Like there's just a lot of other avenues that you can take. But I think first and foremost, having people in your corner and asking for help is okay. And that is something that I'm continuously working on.
It is so hard to do, right? Nobody likes to ask for help. So I feel like we all recognize burnout just in education, not just even in early childhood, but we hear all the time in the news, teachers are leaving the field because of burnout, but we talk about it on this broad scale. Burnout, it's just kind of this umbrella term. And so I think being able to bring it down to an individual level and hear people's stories about what that experience was actually like can kind of help put that name, give it a face for people
Mhm.
as well, and to be able to kind of recognize that. So I really appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable and share your experience and what that looked like for you. I don't know what your plans are with your social media in the future, but will you at least share where people can find you? Because I feel like even if you don't put anything else out, you already have a lot of good content that people in the field can go and access. My hope, I have my fingers crossed that maybe you'll be a little bit more present because I've just loved following you.
Yes, thank you. And ditto. It feels so good to be back and see people that I saw, a year ago or whatever when I would come on. And you can find me at Puddle Jumpers LLC. It is changed. So if that gives away anything and the avenue that I'm going down, that it's not just Puddle Jumpers, it's Puddle Jumpers LLC. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm going. That you will be seeing content, but different content. And I'm very excited to be back and feeling more refreshed than I was a year ago.
Oh, fantastic. That's so awesome. Thank you again. I'm so grateful that you were willing to take the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. Remember to hit that subscribe button to continue learning how to bring more play into your classroom. Plus, get more tips on Instagram at play_before_pencils or at playbeforepencils.com.